Welcome to the CGRFI Guitar Master Series. Here we feature some of the most exciting classical guitarists and musicians and invite them to ask about their experiences as professionals in the classical music world and also delve into their thoughts and philosophies about a variety of artistic topics. I'm delighted to invite for our first ever guest the fantastic Scottish guitarist Ian Watt. Ian has been a concert artist for around 2 decades, and he's won numerous classical guitar competitions and music competitions across the world. Some of the most important ones as well, including the Parkening competition at a very young age, might I add. And so it's a great privilege to have Ian here to discuss some of the nitty gritty behind making music and what it means to be a professional in the 21st century as a classical guitarist. So, welcome, Ian, and thank you for coming along.
Oh, thank you, Samra. Thanks very much. It's my pleasure to be here. It's a great honor, privilege. I
Likewise.
should just correct you that yeah, I did do the parking when I was 18, but I got second.
I mean, that's still huge
Well,
and
it was yeah,
amazing.
it was the first one I did actually. It was the first guitar
Ah, okay.
I did. And so I didn't expect to get that far. In fact, I had to do the Rodrigo concerto in the final, and I hadn't really practiced it that much because I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to get to the final.
Oh my goodness. So, and then you got second. So it must
Well,
have been a very good
there were
performance.
three of us. I think second and third was probably a close shave.
Uh-huh.
So you never know quite uh, uh, what it is that makes them favor one over the other. It might just be what one thing. Uh, certainly the person who got third, played really well. But the first prize I think was right in that competition.
And how was that experience in general? I mean, because you traveled to America just for that competition, right?
Yes, yeah, that's the first time I'd been uh, to the US. So yeah, it was lovely actually to go to the West Coast for
Yeah.
a start and see the Pacific, which is has its own color.
Uh-huh.
You know, it has its own beauty, very
Yeah.
different from the Atlantic. Uh, so I really enjoyed that, and it was in a really nice university campus, the university where Parkening at that time taught. Not sure if he's still there, uh, but certainly was at that time. So it was in Malibu. It was away from the center of LA. So it was a very peaceful environment. It was all done very well how they organized it. And there was a junior competition and a senior competition. I was just in the senior because
Mhm.
I was 18. Um, but uh, but I got to meet quite a lot of the people in the junior competition as well. So yeah,
And
met a lot of people.
did you get the chance to meet Parkening as well?
Yes, we all got to meet him, but not but it was quite formal, I would say, how we got to speak to him. He had to give obviously the odd speech and things, and he was very well prepared for those.
Mm.
He'd written things out, and I've always wondered if that was his way of dealing with. I mean, you're going to ask about how to deal with nerves later, and I wondered. I've wondered since if that was maybe how he dealt with public speaking was just to to be very prepared. Um, but he was very nice. Anyway, and we got to and the only informal interaction I had with him was after the semi-final, and I did have a good semi-final. It's how I probably how I got to the final. And we all had to prepare Castel Nuovo Tedesco Sonata, the Boccherini homage, and I think that was the set piece. I think the rest of the semi-final was kind of free choice. I think it was a kind of 30-minute program. Most of the it was only 15 people got to go to that competition because the actual there was a kind of pre-first round which was done by recording, and so they got it down to 15. The first round there was all set, three set pieces. Second round had that sonata as the centerpiece, and we had to make a program around it. And I think I played that sonata. I just had a really good day with it. And so backstage after I'd played, he said, "Great job, man." So I was delighted. But he wasn't on the jury. He watched everything, but he had nothing to do with the adjudication. The Barweco was the guitar man. But the interesting thing about that competition was that the other people in the jury were non-guitarists. There were people either from the music business uh, or other musicians who play other things. So that gave it an interesting feel as well because they're looking for slightly different things from a player. You know they don't they don't care about well they do care about the technique, but of course they can't judge the technique by how it looks. We guitarists often will judge technique by how it looks, how efficient the hands are, and all this kind of stuff. And we've got obviously the training behind us, so we kind of know what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing with the hands. But of course, a non-guitarist judges technique purely by what comes out. Does it is what comes out good, and not just do the right notes come out, but do they come out well? Are they with a nice sound? Are they not just accuracy, but you need technique. Technique is technique that produces the musicality. It's not the source of the musicality, but you need technique to realize musicality. So anyway, I'm rambling on about it, but it was a really good experience. And then I only really did a handful of guitar competitions after that. I got first in a couple. I think I got second in another, third in one, and I think there were only a couple, two or three more that I actually participated in at all. I didn't particularly enjoy them.
So your competition years were then it seems like they were quite early on in your
Pretty much over when I was 20. I think
right.
I
I see.
won after at some point, but with apart from that, yeah, all finished at 20.
At 20. And so at 20 you were able to focus on becoming a concert artist rather than trying to, play a certain way in a competition or something like this. So was there a change in the way that you approached making
No,
music?
no, there wasn't a change. I never ever played um in a competition for for somebody else.
Okay.
And a couple of times I had people take me aside and give me a quite a serious scolding in a way for how I played. Uh, and that was actually, but I think those were the competitions I got first prize in.
Ah,
So I actually got first, but I still had somebody, different people obviously, give me a dressing down for how I played a certain piece or how I played generally. So I was very much dividing opinion,
yep.
and I had a lot of people thought I was some kind of I don't know extremist in how I played. I'm not quite sure, but I had that comment at one point. So I'm not quite sure what they were getting at. In those days, I was quite influenced by Julian Veeam, and certainly at 20 had by no means found my own voice. I mean, found some of it, but I think Veeam was still a big influence, and of course, people moved away from playing like him, in terms of how they use the guitar as a miniature orchestra. So I don't know if it was that they were getting at. I'm not sure. I think it was a mistake to stop competitions at 20. I should have kept going, but anyway, that is it's how it worked out. It wasn't that long after that they needed somebody else at the conservatoire, the Royal Conservatoire in Glasgow, and so I started working there. what it wasn't that it wasn't. I think maybe a year and a half after my last competition, then I was ended up working there, and so that ended up becoming a major focus, teaching.
Yeah, yeah. And so, um, you had started getting teaching experience from that point on, or were you already teaching as well from a younger age?
Yeah, I've taught for a long time. My first students were when I was in probably in my mid-teens. I
Okay.
started to teach people. I mean, what they got out of me at that time, I have no idea, but I got a lot out of them
Has
because
your
I
has
learned
your,
how to teach.
yeah, sorry, I was just going to ask, has your teaching method it must have developed over the years, and can you talk a little bit about how you've changed your approach to teaching since you started as a teenager, basically?
Well, I mean, it for me, it's all very much experience based. I mean, the materials out there for teaching are extensive, and vast, and there are so many approaches to how you go about it. So you can be familiar with those, but it's only from doing it, I think, that you start to form an opinion on uh, what actually works with people, what works with the majority. Everybody's slightly different, so not everything work, and it takes a bit of experience just to be able to kind of read where people are at
Mm.
and where they are technically, and that can be at all levels really, from a beginner to an advanced player. Um, so
I see. And just to come
I
back
hope
to
that, by the way, before we go, I hope that Lego's not too loud in the.
oh no, we don't hear any Lego.
Oh yeah, okay, that's good. Okay,
oh no, it's
good
he's
enough, okay. My
um
son, my son is just beside me
oh,
playing.
he must be so silent. We don't hear a thing.
No, he's completely silent, but the rustling of the Lego is occasionally. But yeah, so I'm not sure how exactly I could say it's changed, other than that I've there are certain things I've probably formed clearer opinions on,
Mhm.
uh, and other things I've become much more flexible on.
Yeah,
It's not a one-way street, um, by any means, and I'm still learning a lot. I've it's a long time teaching, but I'm still learning a lot about how to do it. I think teaching at an advanced level, I think what that did was teach me a lot about musical interpretation, and I think it was crucial. I know this is not kind of why you should be teaching. It's not, why I went into teaching, because you're there for the students. But I all I can say is that what I got out of it over time was uh, a, a much greater knowledge of how to interpret music.
so it's a source of inspiration then for you teaching.
Yeah, I think the thing is that when you've got the piece of music, uh, and it's someone else's hands that have to produce it. Uh, you're totally free to think about interpretation. You're not bound by, I mean, because even if you're working just with the score away from the instrument, it's really easy to be you kind of have that knowledge of what it takes to produce that particular passage or whatever, So when you're teaching somebody else, you kind of start to hear without any technical difficulty of your own, how it ought to be and what works and what doesn't work, and you start to appreciate the whole very well. I mean, Julian Bream said when I think he was interviewed in the last few years of his life, and he said something like he'd maybe just turned 80, and he said, "I'm a better musician now than I was at 70." And I thought, well, that's easy for you to say because he retired at 70. So he didn't have to actually produce the notes. What he meant, I think, was that he was a better musical interpreter, in a kind of abstract sense. without
Yes.
having to play. So, and I think from that growing awareness of how to interpret music, I started to find my own voice, and I started to shake off the Julian Ream influence. I mean, he'd been so influential on me as a teenager, and it very much formed uh, how I thought you should interpret music. Of course, my appreciation of what he did was incredibly superficial. I've got a far better appreciation for him now. You know,
What changed? How did your appreciation change?
well, I started to realize that the key to his playing and the key to his um his communication as a performer was not so much what is often regarded as his quite excessive use of tone color contrasts, which he does he does a lot of that. He's moving the hand all the time, but it's actually his phrasing.
Yeah.
It's his phrasing and the clarity of his phrasing in terms of where a phrase starts and where a phrase ends and how that fits into the whole. And that's why when he plays a piece of music, he can grip you from the first note right until the last. You're fully engaged with him, and it has this momentum. It's always moving forward, and that's because he knows how those phrases, or he's decided or concluded how those phrases fit together. Um, and I think I had a lesson with him once, and he was very much talking. I mean, he never mentioned tone color once. He mentioned a lot about things like chordal balance, for example, you know, and how you get from one chord to the next, and how that's got to feel, and what kind of space there should be between it, and what the dynamic should be of those two chords. And I mean, incredibly detailed. But he didn't once mention, moving my hand from Sul Tasto to Ponticelli. Yeah, if you ask a lot of people what they say about Julian Ream's playing, oh yeah, his use of color, it was great. Which, absolutely, agree completely. But it wasn't actually the winning. I think for him, it wasn't the thing that made the difference in the end. It was the phrasing.
I see. I see. I mean, he is such a sophisticated player with those deeply basic musical qualities, and
Yeah, the basic musical qualities. Exactly.
and we are often so mesmerized by his color that
Mhm.
we don't listen deeply enough to actually the essence of what he's doing. I want to ask you a little bit about that because that's quite a it's quite a fantastic opportunity. You got the chance to play to Julian Bream. How was that? How was he as a person, and how was he as a teacher in that situation?
Well, as a person, he was a complete gentleman. He was incredibly easy to speak to. I mean, obviously, I was starstruck. He collected me from the station in his car, and he had his dog Django with him. So all of that, of course, immediately uh, uh, breaks the ice with a person, because if you're turning up at the front door, if you had to get a taxi and turn up, and your finger would be like this before you touch the bell. But I think because he turned up and he was just a very very nice man. And we spent quite a lot. I spent the best part of a day with him then. And we spent a good amount of time just talking, actually, for a start. And I think he was probably trying to get the measure of the person he was with as well. He was, trying to get an idea of, what made them tick, or how they thought about things. Of course, probably impossible for him to get a good idea of that, because the young person he's talking to is so starstruck and getting tongue-tied continually. And then I played for him, and I was obviously very nervous. He went out for 5-10 minutes to walk Django and to allow me to warm up for a bit. Didn't really help. I didn't play very well. Uh, he didn't say much about uh, the first thing I played, and then he got really detailed, and it was every single note, and then how that note relates to the next, the balance, and yeah, okay, finally got the balance right, but how do you get to the next note? No, that isn't right. It doesn't have the right lilt. It doesn't have the right lift. I got that right. Okay, now you've lost the chord balance of the first chord again, and it went on like that. So really, really good. Um, he didn't like anything that was frivolous or kind of surplus to requirements, and he used the word fussy. That's that. Don't do that. That's fussy. But yet he was incredibly detailed. So he was demanding, and he was demanding a lot of every single. He was demanding a lot of you at every single note. So it was for me. I didn't quite know what he meant. I thought, on the one hand, he's telling me that what I'm doing there is fussy, but yet he seems to be very fussy about the things he's on about. And it took me a long time to appreciate the difference between detail and fussiness. And that brings us back to the whole point about phrasing and how the phrasing and the musical detail fits into the whole. So a fussy approach is to be trying to shine a light on a bit of the painting that isn't really central. It does make a difference. It is there. It has its function. It wouldn't be there otherwise. There'd be a gap. But we don't want to be just looking at that bit and missing the important stuff. So everything has to fit into a whole. And then I went out for a walk with him. I walked the dog for a bit. That was great. I played a bit more for him. He gave me a good dressing down on how I needed to be a lot better, which was good. He gave me I think a glass of wine maybe or something.
Glass of white to end.
He at one point and a glass of wine. Then he took me back to the station, and he kind of he did invite me back, and he but it was his kind of way. Next time you're in the area, come and see me. And me being 20, I kind of thought, oh, he doesn't want to see me again. And that's why he said next time you're in the area. And so I thought, well, how can I make an ex? But of course, it was just. And I realized now I'm older, and now I would say something like that to someone, that was really an open door
Hmm.
in to come back, and so I really regret not not having the courage to approach him again.
But
Uh,
it's a magical moment. It sounds like a magical day because you spent um, you got to see not only how he approached music, but his life as well, his
well,
house, everything.
yeah, that's right. He lived very very simply. I mean, everybody sees the big house he had, but he'd moved out of that by that time. He lived a couple of miles down the road, and you yeah, but I mean, the thing is, everything he said musically, it took me about 5 years to process all of it. So I mean, it's probably just I'm very slow, but I certainly needed that amount of time. So maybe it was just as well I didn't go back and have things complicated even more. Uh,
Well,
so
it's fascinating. I mean, and also from what it sounds like, he spent so much time with you because he must have really enjoyed your company and your playing as well. So that's a huge,
I mean, I enjoyed speaking to him.
yeah.
I really, and that was as precious as and I mean, he was very, very demanding as a teacher, and everybody will say that. And of course, I felt a little bit you know down by how hard he was, but and everybody told me that everybody else who'd played to him said it was like that with everybody.
It's his approach, you know.
Yeah, yeah, but when to just talk to he was a gentleman, and yeah, I've spoken to people since who knew him socially, neighbors, people who lived in the area, and yeah, everybody had only good things to say about him.
It's
He was
fantastic.
well liked and
Yeah.
very down to earth and normal.
Yeah, sounds like it. Sounds like it. And now to come back to actually something that we briefly touched upon when you were talking about the parkening. and that is programming. Because you spoke about how there was a set piece that was required for the semi final. So, of course, when I'm guessing when you were doing some of these competitions, you might have had to learn set pieces for some of the rounds of some of these competitions. And then when you approached the age of 20 and the competition stage was done for you, how did you go about programming your own concerts? Was it your own artistic taste? Was it what the audience would have liked in that particular environment? Or was it more practical, kind of pieces that you had already known or new works that you were kind of premiering, or perhaps a mix of all three?
It was a mix of all three.
Okay.
Um, I would say, yeah. I mean, always whenever I've got a choice over it, I wouldn't choose to play something that I don't have a kind of sympathy with. But there have been lots of times when I've been asked to play particular things,
Mm.
and you just have to get on with it. You know, or when you're working obviously with living composers and they're maybe writing a new piece, you've you've got to play it, you know, whether you have an immediate sympathy with it or not. And when I did a lot with the Scottish composer John MacLeod, um, and I've been thinking a lot about him recently because it's about 2 years since he died, and he hadn't written. He was he was a phenomenally good composer, magnificent composer, but he hadn't written a note for guitar until he was in his 70s. So I met him when I was at school, and he had to write a piece for for the music school, and it was a funny kind of arrangement because the instrumentation was funny. But, you know, they've got to write around whatever instruments the school has. Um, anyway, he obviously had to write for guitar there, and so I kind of got to know him. And then he said to me, he said, "Would you like to work with me on a guitar concerto?" And I said, "Well, yeah, yes." Oh. So he produced a guitar concerto, and he was 74 or 75. I think he was 75 maybe when he produced that. It was that's a fantastic piece. You know, from the first note to the last note. In fact, he was quite influenced by Indian music.
I see.
In thinking of our last conversation,
Yes.
and the start of the concerto I thought sounded a bit Spanish, and he said, "Well, actually, no, I wasn't thinking of Spanish music at all. It was a little bit Phrygian at the start, but there was some. He'd been influenced by some Indian scale he'd come across,
Okay.
and so he wrote that into into the piece. But that's good. I'm going to be putting that. I've got a recording of one of the concerts we did, and it's not public at the moment, but I'm going to put it out in the next week.
And you
As
played with one of the Scottish orchestras.
we did 3 shows with three different orchestras. They weren't professional orchestras. These three orchestras were a mixture of professional musicians and amateur musicians. But as professional musicians, they tended to be people who had played in professional orchestras when they were younger and were kind of in semi-retirement or had gone much more into teaching,
Okay.
instrumental teaching. So a lot of them were professional players, and these three orchestras got together and commissioned it. But anyway, the reason I brought up John MacLeod is that in the end, he wrote 3 pieces. He wrote a concerto. He wrote this like 3 mythical pieces. They were called. One. It started with one he wrote for his anniversary, his 50th anniversary, and then he added two. And then he wrote this fantasy on Britain's Gloriana, and it was kind of the Britain centenary. And now that Gloriana piece, I played that almost all the time for a couple of years. I played it and played it. I loved it. You know, great piece. The 3 mythical pieces I played once. I premiered, and I never played them again, apart from the last one, which I liked. I had something about it I really liked. The one he'd written for his anniversary. A very beautiful, delicate piece. And then in the last year, suddenly those pieces have clicked, and now
Okay.
I'm about to play them in concerts. I'm still preparing them, but they're getting there.
Your tastes have changed, or there's something about the piece that has.
I just think that sometimes, as I say, I think I'm a bit slow, and so uh, it just took longer to click for me to know what was going on.
And now
And
it's
that,
a staple part.
I mean much more subjectively, really. It's that kind of personal sympathy that you
Okay.
have, that you can have with a person. You know, we find it with people. We might meet people, and there's nothing bad we can think to say about them, but we just don't have that kind of connection.
Mm.
You know, that happens with human beings. And there can be other people we meet who maybe well, usually we can tally up the bad points on the people we know because we know them better. But I mean, you can maybe list lots of things that annoy you about them, but you just have a natural rapport.
Mm.
And I think it's the same with a piece of music. So yeah, I think the three mythical pieces, I think I played them about once, and then apart from the last one, and they were really difficult as well. I didn't make a great job editing them. It's really annoying because I could make a really good job of editing them now, and of course he's dead.
Mm.
And
I
so,
see. Yeah.
so nothing really could be final if I were to do that. Um, and I think I know his music better as well. And so I think knowing a lot of his other pieces better has meant that I recognize him much more in those three pieces.
Do you feel the fact that you knew him closely affects your interpretation of his works?
I didn't know him closely, but I knew him enough to work with him closely on three pieces in a relatively short space of time, just
Mm.
over a year. So in that sense, I did get to know him, and I knew his wife. She was a really good pianist. Um, so yeah, I think it did make a difference. Yeah.
And it's quite a beautiful way of thinking that you have about this, a piece of music being like a person, a living, breathing thing with different aspects to a personality, and you have to find a connection before you can go on stage and present it, unless, of course, you have to, and do that comfortably. So it's a very human way of looking at music.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the music is by a person,
Yes.
you know, and you know, it's really interesting what the person is trying to convey in music, and I think you have to have an idea of that. I mean, obviously, there is the subjective effect on you as the player, very much as it has on the listener, and it's gonna mean something different to every person.
Yeah.
It's not as if they're being spoken to by by an artistic vacuum. Do you know, it's that it's something very objective to the composer that that then has an effect, a subjective effect on us.
Yeah.
As an interpreter, you do have to have some sense of what the composer was trying to do. With a concerto, it was immediate. I just got it. I
Yeah.
loved it. I loved the first note. I loved the whole thing. And in fact, he in the last movement he asked if I'd write the cadenza. So that was great fun. And I used there are so many themes in the piece that I loved. And so it was easy in a way to do because I just I love that theme. What can I do with that? I can combine those two themes, and then it ended with a kind of fugue,
Wow.
which combined a lot of the themes.
So you wrote this fugue.
Yeah. I mean, he
Wow.
didn't tell me about a fugue, but I was really into fugues at the time.
Yep.
So I wrote a fugue. But all the musical material was by him. It's not.
Yeah.
I'm not a very creative person, so
Oh no, no.
so uh, But, dealing with somebody else's melodies, that's okay. Having to come up with them myself, not so much.
And so there, I totally love this way of thinking about the depth of the composer's intention and finding a connection with that. And to bring us on to the next topic is that is incredibly inspirational. But sometimes when you go on stage, there are some hindrances, such as, for example, nerves, which perhaps affect the way in which you express the composer's intentions or your own artistic voice. So, how do you, first of all, do you experience such nerves? And if you do, how do you deal with them or cope with them?
Well, yes, I do, and I think for me they probably get worse as I get older. And I'm not saying I'm not old, but um, but uh, but I think as you do get older, I mean, I would still say I'm a young person, but you start to really the more acquainted you are with music, and the more you hopefully appreciate music, you start to realize that a friend of mine said this actually, who um, was in the well, I would say who he is. He was kind of the I don't know his exact position, but he was kind of the musical director or something like that at Scottish Opera for years and years and years, a long time. Phenomenal musician called Derek Clark, one of the finest musicians I've ever met. Very, very inspirational man. And I remember him saying just about a year ago when I was working with him on some Scottish Opera stuff, and he said, the older I get, the more I realize there's no such thing as simple music. And he gave an example of something from Haydn. And it was essentially just an Alberti bass. He said, but you've got to think, well, how do I play that first note? Do I play with this articulation? Do I play with that articulation? Which note should be most prominent? But suddenly you have a million questions about something that seems incredibly simple. So I think that plays into it. I think that you know, the older I've got, the more I realize that all this music is difficult to play to play it well. So it makes you more nervous. Um, in terms of what I get from nerves, I get cold hands, which I tend to get anyway. But I get them. I really get them when nervous, even if I'm otherwise warm. The hands go cold and they go sweaty, cold sweat. So it's hard to keep a grip on the string. So it's very frustrating. It affects the sound production. I can't quite make as good a sound. You can't make as good a sound with, with cold hands as you can with warm hands, like guitar. Um, the other aspects I think I've kind of managed to deal with over time,
Yeah.
how to play with cold hands. Uh, I think there are various things you can do to help. I recently did Segovia's thing of putting my hands and forearms into a basin of warm water, not hot, because that wouldn't have a good effect. But warm, kind of warmish water, and kept them there for a good few minutes, and that really helps. So for me, it's very much the physical effect of the nerves that would throw me much more than the actual being nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's part of the fun, I think.
Yeah.
The, there's a certain amount of dread with it, but it's part of the fun. So for me, it is having to deal with that physical symptom of nerves much more than dealing with the nerves themselves. Um, One thing I try and uh, do, or maybe I should say not do, is have too much of a pre-concert routine. I've always had the feeling that if maybe it's the kind of personality I've got, but if I were to go down the route of having a strict concert routine, and if something happened one day which meant I couldn't, um, you know, carry out that routine, I don't know what effect that might have. It might you might then somebody could totally lose the composure and balance that they have otherwise, which allows them to process and deal with the nerves in a positive way. Um, so I mean, I know a lot of people do. I like to arrive as late as possible, basically, for the concert. And 'cause as I say, I mean, I do warm up a bit, but because I get such cold hands playing anyway, it doesn't really do much. It is good to you get them moving, even if they do still feel cold on the surface. You do need to get them moving. I mean, that does still help, but I find it doesn't take that long to get me to that point. Uh, and then they just don't get any warmer after to that point. So I don't need a lot of time to warm up, and then the rest of the time you're going to spend will be sitting there worrying about it.
Yeah.
The other side of the coin, though, that what I found is that the more prepared you, this sounds totally obvious, but I do think it needs to be said. The more prepared you are, the more you can handle those things.
Yeah.
I came from a musical background of which was very much um, orally based. I learned by ear for a start. First had music lessons when I was about 4 or 5. Um, that didn't work out. I kind of took against them, and so my parents stopped them. And then and I was really inspired by the band Dire Straits when I was 4 or 5. I still love them. And then when I was about 9, I discovered the Beatles, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Uh, and sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, but it is related. And so I wanted to play guitar, so I started playing guitar. Parents were very supportive, and I had a pretty good ear, so I learned tons by ear. And I had quite an informal teacher for a bit, and he used to come around and we used to jam together. Basically, we'd play some blues. He'd maybe suggest, "Oh, learn that song, get a slightly bigger chord vocabulary or something." But a lot of it was just listening and imitating, uh, and a lot of improvisation, learning to improvise. Blues for a start, kind of rock. A bit later in my teens, I played a lot of jazz. So I was quite, I was, I had a lot of strengths in terms of musical spontaneity, you know. So that, in a sense, then made it hard to deal with once nerves became a problem. You can't rely on that spontaneity anymore, and so whereas I could learn a piece in the early, when I was a teenager, I could learn pieces quite fast. I'd often learn them with errors because I'd a good ear, but not a perfect ear. Do you know, so it meant I could learn things fast, but then there'd be the odd error that I wouldn't pick up on. Uh, but you learn things fast, and then I find in a room I could play this, and I can be totally free with it, and I can play it that way that day, and another way another day. But then go on stage with nerves, and suddenly you're tight. Then the hands are just hands just don't seem to be doing what they can do without any thought in the practice room. And so the way I've had to deal with that is to be more and more prepared and to become better at practicing. And as the other thing that happens seems to be the older you get anyway, is that you seem to have less and less time. There's all this other stuff to do. Uh, as I do a lot of teaching, and I've got a family, obviously, and so there's and then if there's any other stuff needs to be done above that, that really can cut into the practice time. So you have to be able to get by on quite little practice in a way.
Does the practice become more efficient then the older
Oh
you get?
yeah, it has to.
Yeah.
It has to. Yeah.
And how do you, because you are so busy with so many different things going on, both professionally and personally, how do you maintain a level of creativity when it comes to practice? Like, for example, if you're sitting in a practice room and a lot of us often are not thinking about what we're doing, we have other thoughts going on in our head. How do you eliminate those thoughts so that you're just focused on preparing for a concert?
It's not always, I'm not always successful at that, I would say. So I don't want to give the impression I'm an expert on it. Very good at telling my students to do it.
As is
Uh,
always the
I
case.
mean, if, if they listened to me, they they'd do great practice. But anyway, that's a side point. Doing it myself varies. There are some I go through periods where it falls apart a little bit. It's just so difficult to get any time, and to then with the little time you've got, have the discipline necessary to pull it off. It never falls apart when I've got stuff to prepare for. I should, that's different.
Yeah,
Then the mind's totally focused. But when you get those periods when it's a lot of teaching, you maybe haven't got say a solo concert for a few months.
yeah,
And I do a lot of other playing as well that's not solo. And and the kind of stuff that it doesn't have to be quite as slightly different preparation,
yeah,
when it's not just you on your own and every single thing is going to be heard. It's a slightly different. I'm not saying I don't take it seriously. It's a different kind of approach that you need to take to it. Um, but yeah, maybe if we've gotten solo concert 3 months down the line, filled with other stuff, it can really easily fall apart, and it does sometimes. And then it's harder to get it back.
mm,
You know, what I would say is think I do know what works. I know from when I do have to then make it work, I know what to do, you
yeah,
know. And for me, it's to decide what I'm going to practice in a day, how long I'm going to spend on it, and obviously follow through on it in a critical way. And often, if you say, right, I have a lot of pieces to practice, I'm only going to have an hour to practice. Well, you could say I'll spend 30 minutes on two pieces, or I'll spend 15 minutes,
mm,
four pieces. And you think, what can I do in 15 minutes? You can do a lot, but you have to not be over ambitious. You've got to just say, I'm going to crack that phrase, that line. I've got 15 minutes to do it. Well, even to do a line of music well in 15 minutes takes a lot of focus. You've got to use every minute well. Um, and what people have to remember is that feels like slow progress. Only one phrase per day in that piece. But if you think of that after a month, you will have achieved a lot,
yeah,
you know, and you'll have achieved it in a very precise, good way. And if we're honest with ourselves, if we think back at the last month, not every month, sometimes we look back at the last month and think, I don't think I'm any better than I was a month ago. Or maybe we played a lot of guitar. Maybe we had a couple of hours a day to practice. Maybe even more. We look, but maybe we just spent a lot of time playing things through, which has a value for sure. You've got to do that. But uh, yeah, and so having that kind of one step at a time approach, patient has to be involved in that. But knowing that if you are achieving just one thing, those things do start to tally up after a month. And here's the other side of this. So this is the really good part about it, is that if you practice these small things well and efficiently, you will get better as a player in every other way. You'll find after 4 or 5 days of practicing like that when you pick up the other piece that you haven't practiced yet, you just test it, play it through. It's going to be better.
yeah.
Your technique's going to be more precise because of how you're practicing. When you practice like that, it involves quite a lot of repetition. So repeating phrase to get it right a certain amount of times in a row, that kind of thing. The old methods, they work provided you've thought about it and you know how to get it right and what you've got to do to get it right. It's just a question of repeating it that way so you can do it all the time. Well, that's a great way to build stamina.
Yeah.
Be careful that you don't end up with injuries because repetitive strain definitely a real thing. So you have to decide when to stop. But you build stamina, you gain accuracy. It's a win-win when you practice like that. So even the first day feels hard. If you get to the end, I've only done four phrases, four pieces, one phrase in each piece. In 4 or 5 days, you'll find it's going to pay dividends.
It's incredibly highly focused practice
Yeah,
that takes all of your energy and attention,
yeah.
which ultimately leads to a far greater trajectory of your progress. I'm guessing, and this is really incredible ways of thinking, because I don't think we as guitarists think too much about how we use our attention enough in the practice room. And when it comes to, because on to everyone, I would recommend check out Ian's YouTube channel, because he not only does he have incredible playing on there, but very, very, very detailed and informative technique tidbits that really show how you can approach the guitar in a much more efficient and practical and intelligent way. So regarding this, you have developed quite a nice philosophy regarding technique, but I want to ask you, because it is such a vague word, what does technique mean to you?
It means the ability to realize abstract musical ideas, I would say. That's just come out of my head. I didn't think about that before. But um, it's not about how fast you can play per se. It is about being able to play the passage as fast as it ought to be played. So it's not that it isn't about speed. People will say those guys are only fast players or girls are only fast players as if that's some kind of criticism. You know? If they're playing fast when they should be playing fast, that's not a criticism. That's a positive. You're paying them a compliment. But there's of course so many other aspects there. You need technique to balance a chord properly.
Yeah.
You know? Everything you produce, there's something you've got to do physically to produce it. It doesn't happen by itself,
Yeah.
and that's technique.
Yeah.
If people say, "I'm just going to get this passage right technically, then I'll think about the how I'm going to shape it dynamically." Well, but you've got to do something technically to make it crescendo. You've got to push the string harder. So if you get it technically perfect, flat, and then you put in the crescendo, suddenly it's all going to go wrong
Yeah.
because your hands are having to do something different.
Yeah.
Plus, it's not an easy thing. Do you know you're going to change your musical intention as you go along?
Yeah.
So it's not like you can decide from the outset, well, that phrase is going to get louder, so I'm going to practice in a crescendo. You might change your mind. So it can't be a set in stone thing. But I think it's that awareness that everything we do uh, we have to, there's something physical involved in doing this. And that's technique. So somebody who plays a piece with no mistakes, that's no wrong notes, no buzzes, that kind of thing. Well, that takes a certain amount of technical skill, obviously, for sure. And I wouldn't knock it in itself. But then if somebody comes along and plays with lots of dynamics, with fantastic chord balance, with this profound sense of arch and the phrase, with momentum, with all this kind of musical stuff, but they play three or four wrong notes. Well, who has actually achieved the most technically? It's the musical player, because all of those things that the more musical of the two produced, had to be produced by technique. They couldn't do it if they didn't have the technique
Yeah.
to do it with.
Yeah.
And it makes sense.
That makes total sense, and I think that is absolutely the correct approach in terms of technique. We often divide the two, and what you're saying here is that the two are intrinsically linked.
Yeah, they have to be. And of course, that's not to say technical exercises are really good, because we do have to develop the machinery,
Yeah.
you know. So it's again, it's not an and or thing. It's one of these false dichotomies.
Yeah.
We got into that a little bit on another subject in the podcast you did, you
That's right. Yeah.
know. The world's full of false dichotomies, and you're
Yeah.
either in this camp or you're in that camp. You know, you're a technical player. I used to hear this about John Williams and Julian Beam. I like Julian Beam. He's the musical player. John Williams is just a technician. Then I listen to John Williams and I hear this incredible musicianship,
Absolutely.
beauty in his playing. You know, and I don't like Smallman guitars, by the way. I thought it all came out better when he played the flater. But even him, he's so musical that I can actually, even when he plays a Smallman guitar, I like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he just has such a, it's a very natural speaking musicality that John Williams has. It's very different from Julian Dreams for sure, you know, but it's just because John Williams never really makes a mistake that he said, well, he's the technical player, you know.
Yes.
At the
Exactly.
same time, Julian Dream had a great technique, because he would not have been able to reach those profound musical heights that we referred to earlier if he didn't have the technique to do it with.
Yeah.
You know, so it really isn't a, 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 an it's not one or the other by
Yeah.
any means.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You need a certain level of technique to achieve a musical goal. So it
And the
is.
other thing, I was just one last thing I kept forgetting to say it, but I think this is so important. It's more important than anything else I've said. That's that you have to hear it in your head before you can produce it with your hands on a guitar or any instrument. You cannot balance a chord in any other way. Sorry, rephrase it. You can't balance a chord in a particular way unless you have heard it in that particular way.
Yeah.
You can't, you cannot produce anything that you cannot hear, at least not intentionally. You
Yeah.
can produce it by mistake, but we don't want to do that. We need to be intentional, you know. Um, and even the very spontaneous players, I think of one of my great heroes of the piano, Tchaikovsky, very spontaneous musician. He practiced exactly 4 hours a day, and he only practiced at half tempo.
Yes.
There'd be the 30-minute piece. He spent an hour practicing it. And and then he got onto something else. He just played everything half tempo for his practice. Now, I'm not saying that's how you should practice. I really don't think that's an efficient way of practicing. Obviously, his technical formation when he was very, very, very young was so very, very high that he could get by on that, and it in a sense was good for him because he was so spontaneous. Every single night was different, the way he played it. But even then, he was still intentional, even if it was in a spontaneous way. It wasn't all planned out, but he was obviously thinking as he was playing how he wants that chord to sound, or how he wants that phrase to be. So, so even a spontaneous player is not an accidental player.
No.
You know? So yeah, hearing it in your head. I had a great harmony teacher when I was at school. One of the greatest musicians I've ever known. A man called George Taylor. He also died a couple of years ago. And in fact, he was exactly the same age as John. They were born the same year, John McLeod and George Taylor. And he used to say about harmony that your harmony is only as good as your ears. And he meant that you can't harmonize something beyond that which you can hear. You can't recognize if a harmonization is good or bad
Yeah.
unless you can hear if it's good or bad. You know, you have to be able to hear that parallel fifths don't sound good in Handel.
Yeah.
They sound good in Vaughan Williams, but they don't sound good in Handel. But
Yeah.
but you have to be able to hear that they sound frankly crude
Yeah.
in that context. They don't sound crude in Vaughan Williams. They sound great. Or Ravel
Yeah.
sound magnificent. You have to be able to hear that they sound good in Ravel, not in Handel. So his whole approach to teaching harmony was that it wasn't very rule based at all because he was sort of constantly training your ear, and so he didn't really write parallel fifths because it didn't sound good.
Yeah.
So
It's a development of the musical taste.
yeah, but that is intrinsically linked to what you can hear,
Right. Of course.
and it's by exposing yourself to music, learning about the music that you start to hear.
I think that that's a fantastic bit of wisdom to share with us, and perhaps we should conclude with that actually, because it is such an important aspect to making music, and thank you for sharing that with us. It really shows the sincerity with which you yourself approach music. It comes from an intellectual and emotional place before approaching the instrument. So
Yeah.
it's very, very important indeed. So
Do you know, I should say it's other people's wisdom. I'm just recycling it, really.
but
Um,
you articulate it so well.
all I would say is that obviously these profound things that people say to you, um, they do stay with you, and you should make an effort to keep them with you, to kind of embrace them with the heart, and well, not just with the mind, but with the heart,
Yeah.
uh, and think about them. And
Yeah.
as I say, with Bream, it took years for those things, to come to fruition, for me to
Yeah.
suddenly realize the difference between being fussy and being detailed.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the other distinction was between needless, pointless rubato and taking time. The two are very different things. You need to allow the music to breathe, but that's not the same as just playing a generic freeway all the time. You
Yes.
know, it took a long time for the penny to drop with those things. So, uh, so yeah, it's other people's wisdom, but it's I suppose it's stuff that and I love music. All I would say, that's
Absolutely.
probably the most important thing.
That comes across. That very much comes across. So now I'd like to open the floor, and I see that we've already received some questions from the chat. Of course, what's quite nice is with this open mic Q&A, it is an open mic Q&A. So if you would like to say your question from wherever you are, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, I'm very happy to read out questions as well. So the first one we have is from Rohan. And Rohan, would you like to read out your question, or would you like me to? Sorry, you're muted. Would you like me to read out? I think okay. I think your audio isn't working at the moment. Let me check.
Can you hear me now? Sorry,
Yes,
yeah,
yes. Now we hear you.
I'm in a
Yes.
noisy room, so if you don't mind reading
Yeah.
out my questions.
Of course, of course. Sure thing.
Thank you,
So,
Samra.
no worries at all. So, having lived and worked so closely with a composer like that, how did it help you with the shaping of the interpretation, phrasing, microphrasing, to have the composer sing the lines for you or play it on an instrument of their choice?
That's a good question. Um, not, I'm not sure I can give. I don't think I can give an answer that's as good as the question. Actually, the question is better than any answer I can give. And obviously that was referring to John McLeod, and it's quite a long time now as well since since I worked with him on that. Do you know what I've often found with composers is that um, they really like it getting into the hands of the performer, and they like to hear what the performer is going to do with it. I found that they're kind of more liberal actually in the in in what they kind of want from you than say many. I mean, if I were teaching someone interpretation of a piece, I'd I'd probably be asking them to do it like this. It really needs to be like this. And not in an absolutist sense, but in a sense to give them um you know to give them my conclusions on it, and to help them understand the process of me getting to those conclusions. Then they can go away and that will hopefully inspire something in them, which the result will be different. But so I can't really remember John saying all that much about those things in detail. A lot of those things were in the score. He put things in the score when he wanted it. I remember that this is the case with many non-guitarists that when they put slur markings, they're not obviously often they're thinking of it in chord string terms. So what would be a slur on a violin? And of course, that's not going to physically be a slur on a guitar. It just works a different way. But you have to play it like a slur. It's got an element of strong and weak in the slur, legato in the slur. So I used to put when I edited those pieces, I actually followed what Julian Ream did, which was to put dotted lines in to show where I would play a physical slur. And I mean, John, he never complained about any of them, so they must be okay. I can't really remember him singing much. Another composer, I mean, a composer in some ways I know better personally is Eddie Maguire, although I've only ever played music by him that I think I'm right in saying. Yeah, I've played maybe some smaller things he's written for specific things, but his big pieces are pieces he wrote before, and I've then added into concert programs. And he refuses to sing anything, so you've got to you've got to read his mind. Anyway, as I say, I can't really give as good an answer to that as I'd like. It's a great question, though.
Very much so. A good question and also a very nice answer.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Samrat. So, I've always found it challenging to do this with the guitar. I studied piano with a really good teacher, and so she would always get me to think about phrasing and micro phrasing before she tried to influence me with that. And then and even with the piano, she would try and do it without the pedaling. Because when you pedal, then you can get like nice, really joined, slurred legato, smooth legato lines. So, but it has been a challenge to translate that same thing with the guitar.
Yes.
Because the sound decays so quickly, you can't sustain the note as long as you'd like with the guitar. Then I don't know if this is making sense, but
I mean, it makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. Yes, what I've tended to do, I mean, it's maybe not 100% of the time, but when there is a kind of slur marking like that over a series of notes or a phrase marking, it's to use slurs often on the first to second notes of the phrase or micro phrase, which it means that the line starts with a kind of flow. Even if you then, for practicality's sake, even if you can't quite maintain that approach to the line. So I found that's been quite helpful. When you're playing across the strings as well, I always allow the first note to bleed into the second a little bit. Not completely. I don't just let it ring, but I would play the second note and then cut the first note. So it's a little bit like pedaling, or a little bit like even playing without pedal, but you can sometimes do that on piano as well. Just allow the note to bleed into the next to get a really legato effect. So that's really good if you're across the strings. Yeah, and slurring on the first note's quite good. I think one thing guitarists actually miss a lot of the time is what one student of mine, there's a guy I taught a few years ago. He was an amateur player, but he was one of the finest amateur players I ever came across. He was a joy to work with, a privilege really for me. And I was trying to explain this kind of thing to him, and he said, "Oh, it's the pickup of the phrase was his word." And guitarists often play down the pickup. I often think that first note is really important on a guitar because it just establishes. Bream's so good at that. Segovia was as well, actually. It just starting the phrase, and you have a slight lift at the start of the phrase. So the slurs can help with that as well. I would also say that I find that a lot of guitarists don't use enough slurs anymore, especially in Baroque music. There's this thing about I've been teaching people, and I've said Bach, and I say, why don't you put some slurs in? They say, well, it's Bach, and I never know what to say because I'm not sure where that's coming from. Because on bowed strings you would use slurs. You wouldn't use slurs on a keyboard because you can't. That's a limitation of a keyboard. There's no point in us. There's no point in guitarists imitating the limitations of other instruments. We should imitate their strengths, So yeah, I think slurs can really help just smooth things out.
Yeah. I think that's true.
Intelligently placed.
Very much so. I think Rohan did he maybe disconnect, but he wrote in the chat regarding your answer that makes so much sense already. So I think a very satisfactory answer indeed. Okay, we have a question from Siddhartha. And Siddhartha, are you there? You can ask the question yourself if you like, or I can read it aloud, whichever you prefer. Siddhartha, are you there? If not, we will wait for Siddhartha and ask another question. So the floor is now open. We don't have any questions in the chat at the moment. Would anybody, you can raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. Don't be shy, Ian doesn't bite.
Even if I did, I'd bite on the Zoom.
Hold on, let me see. What I do see is Rohan has asked another question, which we can now perhaps answer. Rohan, regarding your one about note accuracy and fluency with a piece, is just the tip of the iceberg of developing musical technique. So that's do you see the chat, Ian?
Yeah, I can see.
So perhaps you could offer some thoughts on that.
Well, I would just agree.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it's very much true.
Well, I would say I wouldn't quite. Yeah, I think note accuracy, fluency, that's the beginning.
Yeah, it makes sense.
That's where it. You need those things, but it's definitely not the end.
And we just got a message from Siddhartha. He's walking on a road, so we'll ask one of his questions. Perhaps the first question that he had: how do you practice concerti without an orchestra?
With a metronome.
Very nice answer.
You can't be your own met. Well, I mean, it's good. I do use a metronome anyway. Not all the time, but but yeah, I think that's important. Obviously, if it's a familiar piece like the Rodrigo Concerto, you know where the parts fit in
Yeah,
anyway. But if it's another piece, then obviously you do need to refer to the score,
yeah,
and you need to be trying to hear the score as much as you can ahead. I mean, as guitarists, we're not really trained in that at all.
makes
So that
sense.
it can be a challenge for a lot of people to hear the score. Um, One thing that you'll find when you're playing concerto is that the thematic material in your part will be in the score as well. Because the stuff's being passed from soloist to orchestra. So one thing that can help you sight read or read the score, hear the score when looking at it, is to look for the same melodic material that you find in the solo part. That's a good start.
It makes sense, yeah. A second question from Ritupawan. Uh, how how would you stay motivated if you don't have shows to perform?
Oh well, yeah, that is awkward because I mean I'm always motivated by music, so that's not difficult. Uh, so it's not a question really of motivation, but unless you class as motivation, just finding that 1% above the 100% that you need to do all the work at the end of the day, do the practice at the end of the day after a busy day, doing other stuff, or just to find that extra bit of energy that you need. I mean that can be that can be really difficult, but I think what you should try and be motivated by a love of the music that you're playing. And what I find is that because I've got so much else on from day to day that is not playing my guitar, you know, that I really love to play my guitar. So, and I love thinking about music, and it's maybe not so hard for me to find the motivation as such. I think if you were someone who didn't have Uh, I mean, if your whole musical life and whole life was playing your instrument and practicing, and you didn't have anything to practice for, it would be much more difficult to motivate yourself. And but the other thing is that we tend to think that we need uh, an outlet for it to be worthwhile. And I suppose in some sense there's a certain amount of truth in that. I mean, obviously, especially if you're trying to make a living at it, you can't just play in your bedroom. What I would say is that there is an intrinsic value to playing music at as high a level as you possibly can. There's an intrinsic value to getting that phrase perfect. Even if in theory no one else ever heard it. I'm reminded of these Gothic cathedrals that were built in the Middle Ages, and they're so high. And for us now, with drones and airplanes and various means of being able to get up high, I mean, it would be much more natural for us to think we need to get that bit right, at the top. But to the medieval uh, craftsman, as far as he was concerned, no one would ever see that again. No, the thing that went on top of in the middle of a huge structure, right at the top. As far as he was concerned, no one would ever see that. but the people who I've seen have blown away by the craftsmanship and the beauty and the. So there's a realization that there's an intrinsic value in that work.
Yes, yeah. I think that's a very beautiful way of putting it. It's more for the purpose of art than for a particular practical reason, you know. And I love the analogy with the Gothic churches. You know, it's very true. They didn't know that drones would exist in the 21st century to be able to
Oh,
see that.
not just churches. I mean, any. I mean, obviously, when we're building a church, there's um, a very high ideal, if you like. You know, it was being built for something greater than themselves, greater than that building.
Yeah,
Um, but even building, other things. I think there was still this, um, you know, belief in just in the intrinsic value of making something beautiful.
yeah.
I mean, even if it certainly does. You playing a phrase beautifully in your room certainly takes nothing away from the world. It only adds, doesn't it? It only adds to things.
Very true. Very true. Indeed. Okay, let's see. We have thanks for your kind words, Rohan, and thank you for joining. We have a question from a username that is I think I can't pronounce that username. Some advice on stamina training for particularly weak hands. So perhaps some thoughts on
Well,
maintaining.
I've got this problem, so I should know. I've definitely naturally weak hands. So technical exercises are very useful for this if if they're done well, carefully, accurately. Slurs are really good for the left hand, for instance. This kind of thing for the right hand, the extensor muscles. So practicing squado type stuff will build strength in your right hand. So that's all really good. I get back though to what I say about efficient practice. If you're practicing, if you're just playing a piece from beginning to end, it does require a lot of stamina, but and often we find we haven't got the stamina to do it. But more more to the point, we'll find that by just playing it from beginning to end, we won't build the stamina. You know? And it's because there's not enough repetition of particular movements.
Hmm.
So you've got to go back to, well, think of being in the gym, doing weight training. And if you get a personal trainer to give you some advice on that, they get you doing kind of rounds of things, your repetitions. So you do this exercise, repeat 15 times. Then you do this exercise, repeat 15 times. Then you do this exercise, you repeat 10 times. Then you go back to the one you did before, the first one. And you do that a certain amount of times. Might be a bit less, maybe. I'm sure there's different approaches. I'm definitely not an expert on this. But it's that repetition which builds strength, but without it being the repetition of only one thing, which will cause problems, physical problems. You know?
Yep.
So there's a lot you can learn from seeing how people build the body here. And so when we're taking a phrase and we're repeating a phrase over and over and over again, if we've worked out what we need to do to get it right and we're able to do it, you then need to repeat it to be able to do it consistently. Just that one thing. Well, when you're repeating that, you're repeating very precise, specific things. It's certain parts of the hands that are required to play that particular phrase, and not others. So by repeating those things, you're going to build strength in those parts of the hand. And then if you imagine you do that with every phrase requires a certain, slightly different uh, set of muscles. So, some phrases much more the fourth finger, or the fourth finger being used like this, or the fourth finger being used like this. It's all different. By repeating those things, specific things, you'll gain strength. But then it's knowing not to repeat it to the point that you're going to get repetitive strain injury. So you need to know where the limit is. I say I can't do any more on that today. It's not perfect yet, but I just have to come back to it tomorrow. Go on to something else. You'll be working on another set of muscles.
Yeah, yeah, and we have a response from the person that asked the question. Thank you. We'll try and expand my technique over time. So that seems to have.
I'm trying to do that as well. So.
Okay, so perhaps one more question. I think we have time for one more. I leave the floor open. If nobody else has another question, then I'll look for the chat. At the chat, maybe I've missed a question or something. But the floor is now open at the moment. If somebody wants to ask a burning question, and also if you have a question that you would like to ask, but you want to perhaps not ask it at the moment, you will also have the opportunity to ask something tomorrow. During before or after the masterclass that Ian will be giving to two of our students. So we don't have any requests for questions, so I'll just take a look at the chat, and we have one question perhaps from Siddhartha again. Are there any particular pieces that you find immensely profound or having a deep emotional impact in the classical guitar repertoire? How did you come across the music of Chaminade?
Well, lots of pieces, and my taste probably changes from so yeah, it's not sure if there's one that specifically from the guitar repertoire that really stands hand and shoulders above the rest. There are obviously lots of very, very fine pieces, but certainly Bach does stand out, and we're very blessed as guitarists to be able to play a number of big pieces by Bach, to have them in some way in our repertoire, even though it's not exactly native soil. But so yeah, I mean, obviously Bach's Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro piece I played a lot, and still love very much. I really love the classic Spanish repertoire. I've never yet got bored of Albéniz and Granados. Read those pieces, played those pieces so often, so many times. Never get bored. I love them, and I think let me see. I think Thalia's Homenage probably stands out as a particularly good piece, and I would also say that I think Recuerdos de la Alhambra is a masterpiece. Now, I mean, there's some people who get quite snobbish about that, but it's not a complicated piece, but no one else has ever been able to write it. No one else did write it. It's only been done once, and there is a kind of perfection about it. Not a note too many or too few. And I think that piece will continue to stand the test of time as an original guitar piece. And I remember one friend of mine saying, he said, guitarists always seem to say, "Oh, not another Recuerdos." And he said, I've been going to guitar concerts for 20, 30 years, and I think I've only heard it once in concert. No one plays it because it's apparently played all the time. It's like, so yeah, by a guitar composer for guitar, I do think that is a particularly fine piece. I know there's people may turn their noses up at me saying that, but and 10 years ago I wouldn't have said it. I'd have wanted to appear intellectual, Oh, I don't care. I'm gonna just say it.
Well, you certainly come across as both intellectual and deeply emotional as well, and I think you're absolutely true about the Recuerdos. There is a perfection, a beauty about it that is perhaps unsurpassed in that form. So it's a very, very beautiful thought. Yeah. Ian, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure to have you, and I know from the questions and from the turnout that we have really enjoyed everything that you have had to share. And I'm glad that I don't have to say goodbye, because tomorrow you'll be coming again for 2 masterclasses where we get to see your musical ideas in action. And just for everybody, this will be the same time tomorrow, 7 p.m. IST, 1:30 GMT. And
You're very wise just to say that to me.
yes, absolutely. I'm constantly, and of course, daylight saving is coming along in a couple of days, so it's going to change as well. Yes, so tomorrow there'll also be a chance for those of you to ask any questions that you might have thought up over tonight or tomorrow morning. But till then, we will see you, Ian, tomorrow when Shrishti and Bhavya will play for you. And thank you very much for a really wonderful interview.
My pleasure. Great questions from you, Tamrat, from everybody else. So a joy for me to speak. Sorry for when I haven't expressed things as clearly as I would have liked. But
No.
Hopefully there's something to take away.
Yes, a lot indeed.
You see, with another audience member as well.
Yeah, I saw him in the background. It's fantastic.
Okay.
Bye, Edward.
Right.
Take care.
See you later.
Bye.
All the best. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye.